Good morning. It was last week that we began looking at this, an overview of this Gospel of John, and we are going to continue that view this morning by digging into what is the prologue of his Gospel. And when I say that this prologue is remarkable and completely out of the ordinary, I don't say that to suggest that prologues in and of themselves are out of the ordinary. What John does here, every other gospel account does as well. Matthew, this is the record of the genealogy of Jesus, son of David, son of Abraham. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, Mark 1. Luke, as he writes to Theophilus, inasmuch as others have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished amongst us, everyone is doing the exact same thing, giving a prologue to what they are about to accomplish, and John begins much in the same way, because a prologue just says, this is the story that I want to tell you. And that's what John does. That's what we're going to spend some time looking at. But what I want to recognize in our time together is just how truly profound this prologue is. John's thoughts on the character that he intends to reveal to us, Jesus, it earns it a special place amongst all the New Testament writers. Paul wrote of the deep complexities of the gospel and its work within us in the book of Romans. Peter, in 2 Peter 3, portrays this vivid and terrifying image of judgment at the return of the Lord. And John will later give us visions of heaven through the revelation of Jesus Christ that are indescribable. But nowhere do we get a more rich and a more deep view of Jesus than maybe in these first 18 verses of John. He tackles the origin of the universe and then so casually puts forward the most captivating doctrinal statement about the nature of Jesus. John is beginning his gospel account, and he's declaring in no uncertain terms that my story is an excursion to the center of the universe to discover that which created it all and has come to you. Buckle up. And now I have to somehow reveal the rest of the story and try to carry that same attitude and character through it. I hope that you are excited to study the Gospel of John. Because what we'll read today, what we'll study today, will tell us what verse 19 through the end of the book is going to be all about. Verses 19 through the end of the book are going to be telling you why you need to believe what we read today and why you need to fall on your face before the Creator of the universe. And to start that, John does something remarkable. He quotes from what is arguably the greatest opening statement ever handed down to humans in literature. Now, I need your help for a moment, because we're very well aware of opening statements. George Lucas had his a long time ago in a galaxy. You tell me what the rest of that is. Far, far away. We know opening statements well. Rodgers and Hammerstein, the hills are alive with the sound of music. But John begins his gospel in the beginning. I was wondering how that would go. In the beginning, we expect, in the beginning, God. And John says, in the beginning was the Word, the Logos. I'm not going to call any attention to anyone who might have said, we're talking about the logos of God today. It's the Logos. That's what we're going to be talking about. But what that does is it immediately throws the reader off their heels a little bit. Everything that I thought I knew has been tossed out the window, and I need to think carefully about the words that he is about to reveal to me. And speaking of that, why did I not go forward with that? I'm sorry. Speaking of that, how many times have you read this? The Gospel of John. How many times have you heard his account of the Messiah? How many times have you strolled with him around the shores of Galilee? Have you followed him on a journey to Samaria to speak to a woman at a well? How commonplace is his description of the garden? How many times have you seen the crown of thorns placed upon his head? How used to have you become to him being spit upon and nailed to a cross? How many times have you watched the Son of God die? And it is just that. The account of the Son of God who came to earth and died, that we may be saved, that we may have a hope of eternal life with him in heaven. Praise God for that, but how many times has that been to you what the book of John is about? I had a truck whenever I was at the end of my high school career, getting ready to go to college. It was not anything to look at. It wasn't anything special. Wasn't the fastest truck, wasn't the biggest truck, but it was undoubtedly the loudest truck in all of Winchester, maybe in Lexington. They used to tell me when I was coming off of Circle 4, coming to the Leestown Road campus of BCTC, they would say, "Kyle, we heard you getting off of New Circle, a mile away from where I was going to park at. So we heard you coming." I had the loudest truck, but I also loved my music. And so I had to have a loud radio because the louder I went, the weaker the radio was. I had to turn that volume up and crank it up a little bit more. And I would drive a while and I would get used to it. And so I would crank it up a little bit more. And then I would get to my house and I would turn the truck off and go inside. And I would get used to the quiet. And then the next day I would get out to go to work or go back to college. I would come in and I would get in my truck and I would put my seatbelt on. And I would put the key in and I would start the truck up and bam! Rock would just almost blow me out of my truck. You'd think the guy in the holding on to the sofa and the Dolby Digital sound blowing his hair and his ties flying behind him. That's what I imagined I looked like, is that speakers would just pound against my ears. This is also the reason why Holly would say my favorite phrase is, "Huh?" What'd you say? The gospel is supposed to do that. The gospel is supposed to hit us, screaming, "The Son of God has come." There are three things that I hope the Gospel of John, specifically these first 18 verses, does for you. I hope that they reveal to you the magnificent awesomeness of the Logos, the Word of God. I hope that they reveal to you that there is an intended and there is a sometimes observed reaction from us towards the Word. And I hope that they show to you that the Word is active and it is doing something. He is doing something amongst us. Now, for those of you that were afraid that the Florida College lectures would make me even more long-winded, we're only going to talk about that first one this morning. This evening, we'll talk about the other two. So I encourage you to come back and join us for that. But the first thing I want us to consider is this idea of the word, the Logos. And the translation that you have, "in the beginning was the Word," is arguably it is a completely inadequate word, a translation. The phrase "word" does not convey what Logos means. But there's also not any other word that's any better. And so, while completely inadequate, it may be the best word that the human language has. When you look back through history, the way that the Greeks used this, some Greek philosophers used the phrase of logos to describe the eternal principles which set in order the cosmos. A lot different than just the idea of word. The Stoics would say that logos is the mind of God permeating, guiding, controlling, and directing all things. And Plato and Aristotle said logos accurately describes the rational faculties of man. They were talking about our mind, our ability to reason. John may have been the first to say logos is a person. The person who has dwelt amongst us, the person who has revealed God and is in fact our God. Now I want you to note from the very beginning of this, his focus is to say that the Logos is not a created being, but has always been. The word in the beginning, the word was with God and the word was God, does not contain what Matthew and Luke say, which is, here is the genealogy of Jesus. And it might be that John doesn't begin with this because his very point is, truly, there is no genealogy. The Jews and the purpose and the reasons behind Matthew's account and Luke's account is to draw attention to the Messiah, Jesus, his relationship to royalty and his relationship to bringing redemption. But John's focus is to say, he has always been. And so there is no genealogy that I can point to because he wasn't created. Now this flies in the face of some beliefs today. The Muslim belief is that Jesus is a prophet created by God. The Jehovah's Witness belief is that Jesus was a God, but nonetheless created by our Father and then worked to create all things by him. But that's not what John said. John belabors the point. In fact, the Greek, and not only do we not have the time, I don't have the ability to articulate the way that the Greek and its structure conveys the opposite of that belief. But in the Jehovah's Witnesses translation of the Bible, the New World Translation, they will put in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a God, to bring about this idea that he was not the one true God, but that he was a created being of God that served as a God himself. But the reason they do that is because there's no definite article before theos. You'll see here, I've got the phrase, ho logos eimi theos. That word ho means the, that is the definitive article, the word, but there is no is the God behind that. And so they say, well, because there is no definitive article, it must mean that it is just some other God, not the one true God. Again, I said we're not going to try to figure out all the Greek behind that, but I think we can just use what John says next to prove that's not wrong. For example, in verse 6, there came a man sent from God whose name was John. When he says, there came a man, it is the similar structure. We have definitive articles that are pointing to this man, that is the subject of what we're talking about, and then came from theos. And there is no ho theos, it's just theos. There's no definite article, and yet there's none who go, John was sent by just some God. They all agree he was sent by the God. So just using the very same context that we see later, consistently speaking, we can recognize that John, it doesn't have to imply that. But then John also belabors the point with this very confusing, he says this in the most convoluted way. Verse 3, all things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that came into being. Wow, you couldn't have found an easier way to express that he made all things? And no, he couldn't. Because it was important that he emphasize, both positively and negatively, Jesus made everything. And therefore, Jesus cannot have been created. The Logos created all things. And so if the Logos created all things except for himself, then that's not exactly all things, is it? And that right away undermines the validity of the message that we have set before us. He created all things positively. Negatively, nothing that he made, nothing that has been made was made apart from him. The Word, the Logos, cannot be something that was created unless he created himself. This is a nonsensical argument, and thus, to John's point, the Word is and can only be God. He was in the beginning with God. He was God's creative force in the beginning, bringing in the cosmos into existence, and He Himself is God. And just as quickly, He says those things, and then He turns His attention in verse 4, and He starts bringing up some very notable words that if you're following along with a mind of creation in the beginning, if you're following along a mind of creation, you recognize that the words He's using are creation words. He talks about light and life and darkness. 3 words that are very important to the creation, that darkness was upon the face of the deep. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And then He brought about life into His illuminated world. I think when He says, in Him was life, and the life was the light of man, and light shines in the darkness, and darkness did not overpower it. Now, if you're reading in the New American Standard, you'll have did not comprehend it. I don't know, but I don't think that is probably the best translation there. I understand why they did that. They translated that comprehend because a little bit later he will say in verse 9, the world was made and the world did not know Him. He came to them and they did not receive Him. He uses similar language to say they didn't comprehend Him. But I don't think that that's what this verse is talking about. I think that what was read for us by Micah, I think that the translations that use the word overpower are more fitting. Because I think that there's a bit of a chiastic structure to what he has just said. If you'll just recall quickly that a chiastic structure is that you have points that kind of sandwich together a main point. So point A, or here we would have 4 points, and the first and the last point go together, and the 2 points in the middle go together. But when you look at it that way, really what it kind of says, and I'm going to change the wording just a little bit, but I think you'll see my point, is that the life was the light of men, and the light shone into the darkness, and the darkness was not destroyed. And I know it doesn't use the word destroyed or death in that, which would be the opposite of life and death. But the Greek word that they used there that's translated overcome has in its meaning the idea of laying hold of one's life, reaching out and grabbing one's life to overcome it, to defeat it, to crush it. And thus, thinking about it this way, it's a very powerful beginning to this gospel, which is a reminder that a story that is going to end with the death of the main figure that we're all longing for and hoping for, and he dies at the end. We're told at the very beginning, this isn't a sad story. Because he is life and he is light, and even though he's shown into the darkness cannot defeat him. The darkness cannot destroy him. Another important note on that would be to see its relation to the creation account. See its relation to the creation account. God brought light into a physical creation. And ultimately that led 6 days later to the life of men. We kind of can recall in our minds the days of creation and how that worked out. But ultimately, God began, let there be light, and there was light, and that led to life. And then darkness came in. The darkness that had been separated, that had been expelled by the light and separated and put in its place, now crept back into the place of light. And because of that, man died. This time, John tells us God didn't bring light leading to life, he bring life leading to light. This time, God is bringing life into the world so that man may be illuminated and darkness dispelled from him. Darkness referring to, in many ways, along with light, referring to their moral characteristics, sin and disbelief, truth and morality. You know, when I think about it that way, it's always of such a great impression to me. The power of light. And its ability to have a very provoking and powerful manifestation into our lives. We know it. We recognize it. We may take it for granted, but we need and rely upon light immensely. Whenever the sun goes down, we begin to see that. It doesn't take very long. Even before the sun is down, there'll be times towards the late afternoon where if I'm in my office back here working, I may have worked most of the day without my lights on, but I need to turn the lights on so that I can see better. As the sun goes down in our houses, we begin to recognize that I'm not able to move around as well. I need light to guide my way. We recognize that, and we recognize the power of light, but maybe no more powerful is that than when we are in complete and utter darkness. Darkness that is not found by just turning the lights off in your house at night, because you'll recognize there comes an ability with time, your eyes get ready. Wow, that word went right out of my head. Acclimate, and as your eyes acclimate, they begin to draw in the scant traces of light that are sometimes only coming to us from the stars. From billions of miles away, that light is coming down to us from the sun and the moon, the sun's power reflecting off the moon, that very scant traces of light. Our eyes have the ability to draw that in, and even in the darkness, we can see. But you go to a place completely removed from that. I'm always thoughtful of the idea of being in a deep cave. We have been to Mammoth Cave and the Ray Caverns in West Virginia, or in Virginia. We've been to these places where you go underneath in the bowels of the earth and there is no light to be found. And they shut off the lights that have guided us in there, and they tell everybody, turn your flashlights off, turn all light off, and we are engulfed. I don't know a better word. I don't know how to describe it. We are ensnared, like we are trapped in the darkness because I can't see to get out of here. I can't lead myself out, and not only can I not lead myself out, I become immensely aware of how alone I am. The people that you came in there with may be standing right beside you, but I can't see them. And if we've spread out some, I can't even feel my way to them for fear that I may step and fall. It is as if it binds us and wraps us up. We're claustrophobic. In fact, some people literally get so unnerved by that, they have panic attacks and anxiety attacks from it. But then the guide, generally using something very small. One time it was a match. One time it was a little lantern that burned gas from rocks mixed with water. But the guide will take and create a spark. And you think of that match as the phosphorus tip of that match strikes against the matchbox. That light erupts in the darkness, and if you're even not very close to it, you squint. You kind of recoil because already you've gotten used to the darkness. Even though you can't see, you can't feel, you already have started to acclimate to, I live in darkness now. And when that light strikes, it hurts. But how quickly it illuminates. And you see the people that you came in there with, and you're able to draw closer, and you feel companionship, and you feel comfort, you feel warmth maybe. This is the picture of the light that has come into the world to shine into the darkness, and it will not be defeated. What's so amazing about that is, yes, you know what? The matchstick, it'll burn out. And that little lantern, it'll run out of its gas. The fuel source will die. The flame will go out. But while it has fuel, as thick and just visceral the dark is, you can almost feel the dark crawling on your skin as if it's tugging at you. It cannot touch the light. It cannot put out the flame. It cannot, we think of a horror movie where you turn on your light and something reaches out of the darkness and extinguishes it. It's not real because it has no power over the light. John says that is the Logos of God. And He has come. And He will have victory. And that's where we're going to stop this morning. And we will, Lord willing, continue verses 6 through 18 this evening. But just in a way of summary to the things that we have just learned in verses 1 through 5. In the old beginning, God's power of creation, His Word, which was with Him as much as it was Him, said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and it retreated as the light coming from God filled His creation. But in the new beginning, God's power of creation, His Word, which was with Him as much as it was Him, looked and saw that darkness had entreated back into His creation, swallowing it. And so He sent His Word, in whom was life, to bring light and shine that light, shine His morality and His truth back into the world. And as brightly as that light shines into the darkness in that day and in our day, it will not be defeated. As we end, I want to draw your attention to this last point. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 3, all things came into being. I hope that what you will recognize that I'm drawing attention to are the tenses of those words that John begins saying, this is the past. And these are timeless truths. They're timeless. They're not affected by any span of time. But this is what has happened long ago. This was the past. But verse 5, the light shines. That word is the present. That word brings the past screaming into our life today to say what was true of long ago remains true today. God will be victorious because God is victorious. That is the word John wants you to see. Who was and who is and who will ever be. This is the Jesus who He invites you to fall upon your face in faith, believing that He is the Christ, that He is the Son of God, the light of man. John 12, verse 36 says this, while you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become sons of light. Jesus spoke that, telling them that there would come a time when the light was leaving them to go back to the Father. And it also reminds us of the time frame that we are under, to recognize that we don't have eternity to choose to allow the light to illuminate us and shine in our lives. He calls us to recognize there are two options available to you. Eternity in the presence of the light of God, or an eternity in outer darkness. And He calls us to see that. While you have the light, believe in the light that you may become sons of light. But emphasizing again the end of that you may become sons of light. There are those here who have believed in Him to everlasting life. But is that all that you have received? No, we will see in the next section that you have received a power and a right to be called children of God. Are you living as a son of light today? As we said, light shines into the darkness that cannot be defeated. If I am not living as light today, it is not because the light has been extinguished in heaven, but because I am no longer reflecting it. Turn back to the Lord, repent, and shine His light today. If we can assist you with that, come forward and let's talk about it together as we stand and as we sing.